One, two, experiência de som, he. 1, 2, está limpinho.
fase 2, aquilo continua em termos de acompanhamento da situação. Não, as multas têm aqui o... Sim, têm aqui o chamado cumprimento de ato de notificação, tem de facto a possibilidade de ser
Estou a falar aí para os seus ouvidos. Está-me a ouvir? Ainda não me está a ouvir? Tem sinal aí? Tem sinal? Está-me a ouvir? Mas olha que o sinal está a entrar bem ali, na máquina. Aqui, olha, aqui está tudo bem. É. Não. Mic, estes quadros. Um, tu, experiência de som. São 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, experiência de som. Está bom para si?
So, good morning, bom dia, very warm welcome here in this beautiful room at the beautiful new headquarters of the Portuguese police, the Polícia Judiciária in Lisbon, Portugal. We are here to launch today Europol's flagship report, the SOCTA 2021. And SOCTA is not just another abbreviation. It stands for Serious Organized Crime Threat Assessment, and it's published only once in 4 years. We are very pleased to be here today, and I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers. On my left, Portuguese Minister for Judicial Affairs, Francisca van Dunen. European Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ms. Ylva Johansson. Europol's Executive Director, Katrien de Bolle. And Portuguese Minister for Home Affairs, Eduardo Cabrita. I also would like to welcome you in the room. We are respecting social distancing in the times of COVID. And I would like to welcome anybody who follows us today via the live stream, wherever you are on this planet, whichever time zone you are in. Special welcome to every police officer and the law enforcement family, and also to Europol staff, which has been working on this report for months, and I'm sure they're also listening in today. It's not for me to welcome the police because we are guests here, but I would like to say thank you to Luís Neves, National Director of the Polícia Judiciária, and Carlos Farinha, Deputy Director, for having us here today. The SOCTA is the most comprehensive threat assessment ever undertaken in assessing the landscape of serious and organized crime. And we will listen today to our speakers and hear different angles. And we are very pleased to be here today under the Portuguese Presidency of the Council of the European Union. My name is Jan Opgenot. I'm spokesperson at Europol, and I will be your guide, your Sherpa today, and talk you through this ceremony. We will start with our speeches, then we will have a roundtable discussion, and end it up with questions from the audience. If you are interested in the report, and you should be, because it's the most comprehensive assessment on 300 pages on serious and organized crime, you will find it on Europol's website, where you will also find the press release and the PDF for download. You will find it on our social media channels, and if you are lucky to be in the room, you will also find it next to the door. Without further ado, I would like to welcome now Minister Francisca van Dunen for a welcome speech. The floor is yours.
Muito bom dia a todos.
Good morning.
Senhora Comissária,
Madam European Commissioner for Home Affairs, Madam Executive Director of Europol,
to the Commissioner Johansson, and the Executive Director of Europol, Mrs. de Bolle, for coming to Lisbon to the presentation of this SOCTA 2021 report. Now I'm speaking in Portuguese. You are very, very welcome.
your presence honors us a lot. On one hand, it's a great signal about the positive evolution of controlling the pandemic in Portugal. This has required us all, namely the police forces, a huge effort, great resilience. And on the other hand, your presence here also shows how good our relationships are with the Commission and the Portuguese Presidency, represented here by myself and the Minister of Home Affairs, and also the good relationships between Europol and Judiciary Police. I'd like to thank the National Director of Judiciary Police for the support provided to organizing this event during the Portuguese Presidency of the Council. Mr. Minister of Home Affairs, Madam General Prosecutor, Commander General, National Directors, Director General, dear guests, Your Excellencies. Deepening the space of freedom, security and justice means we all have to endeavor to build a Europe where all citizens feel safe, free and protected, and where they can enjoy their fundamental rights. A Europe that promotes justice for all, guarantees respect for human rights and protects victims of crimes. The world of crime was a pioneer in bringing down physical borders. Crime, and organized crime in particular, knows no borders, namely when criminal activities are carried out resorting to new information and communication technologies, as it happens increasingly more frequently, among many other cases, with the sex abuse against children online, the advocating terrorism, hate speech, or selling counterfeiting vaccines. This is a dynamic, complex, and ever-evolving phenomena affecting all member states and requiring plenty of resources and specialized knowledge that we have to fight with energy and effectiveness, based on an assessment of threats and identifying the existing vulnerabilities to get to know risks, and so that we are prepared to face them in the best way. Protection of European citizens cannot be attained through isolated actions of member states, nor through sectorial approaches. A joint work is necessary, adding dimensions of policial cooperation and judiciary cooperation that are essential for Europe to provide a common, multidisciplinary, integrated response oriented based on the action of competent authorities. Cooperation and information sharing between the authorities of member states and between them and Europol are crucial for us to fight organized crime, terrorism, money laundering, and other criminal activities associated to low-risk, high-profit business models, such as is the case of the counterfeiting of goods and products with damaging effects at several levels, namely to health and to the security of our citizens and also to the economy. It was for these reasons that the Portuguese presidency decided to place the subject of counterfeiting in the political agenda of the European Union. So that is why the Portuguese presidency decided to put this issue of counterfeiting on the agenda of on the political agenda of the European Union, and to raise awareness to the growing involvement of organized criminality in these activities and to the urgent need to fight it, as it has been shown during this period of pandemic. Only through cooperation, coordination, and sharing of information can we achieve the necessary success in preventing and fighting the serious forms of criminality in the current world. Only that way will it be possible to follow up political cooperation, make judiciary cooperation effective, gather proofs, evidence, and obtain condemnations in court. In this context, I think it is fundamental an effective cooperation between Europol and Eurojust. Under this framework, let me stress the role of Europol in preventing and fighting all forms of serious and organized crime, as well as terrorism, for its role in gathering, treating, and analyzing information and supporting the complex operations of law enforcement and prosecution authorities. Europol is facing a series of growing challenges. In a scenario of diversification and intensification of threats that justify the quick adaptation of its status to the current reality so that it can play fully its role. SOCTA 2021 report that is made public today is therefore quite relevant at the moment of transition to the new political cycle of the EU in fighting serious and organized international crime. As a strategic report that provides an exhaustive assessment of threats, including external threats with impact in the EU, but coming from the south of Europe, SOCTA is a vital instrument for political decision makers, for law enforcement authorities, and for the public at large, identifying areas where the operational response should focus. As all reports, I believe SOCTA may evolve, may improve with a greater involvement of prosecution authorities, as it happens in many member states, such as is the case in Portugal. And I've said this before, there can be no security without justice and no justice without security. These are two complementary realities that should be side by side on the fight against criminality. Only a joint work with aiming at protecting our citizens and the common values that unite us will allow us to attain high levels in responding to crime. Now, to close, let me thank Europol for having prepared this report, and of course also to thank the support of the member state and third countries authorities, as well as other EU agencies and international organizations. But I would like to thank Europol for preparing this report that will be used as will be an input to the decision to be made by the Council in the strategy for the next 4 years and for the operational work to be developed. And I would like also to thank for the initiative to organize in Lisbon during this semester of the Portuguese presidency the public presentation of SOCTA 2021. I can ensure you, Madam Executive Director, you will have all the support of the Portuguese competent authorities, namely the Polícia Judiciária, as national competent authorities to investigate serious forms of crime, economic and financial crime, terrorism, so that we can cooperate without any reservations with Europol. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado. Thank you very much, Minister Francisca Van Doenen, for your insights into the objectives of the Portuguese presidency and your kind words on Europol. I would like now to give the floor to Europol's Executive Director, Katrien de Bolle.
Dear Ministers Van Doeren and Cabrita, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues and dear participants at home. For us and for me, it's a pleasure to be here in Lisbon today on the occasion of the release of the SOCTA 2021. It's the Serious and Organized Crime Threat Assessment. SOCTA is Europol's flagship analytical report, which delivers insights into and an assessment of the serious and organized crime situation in the European Union. The 2021 edition of the SOCTA is the most comprehensive and in-depth study of serious and organized crime in the EU and even globally. It is a unique assessment. Once more, Europol has harnessed its position as the nerve center of the EU's internal security architecture, with its platforms, databases, and services connecting law enforcement authorities across the EU and globally. While I am very pleased to present the outcome of the SOCTA, of the analytical work, I'm also very concerned about the findings of these analyses. EU citizens enjoy some of the highest levels of security and prosperity in the world. However, the EU still faces serious challenges to its internal security, which threaten to undo some of our common achievements and undermine shared European values and ambitions. Along with terrorism, serious and organized crime continues to constitute the most pressing internal security challenge to the EU. The intelligence picture and assessment presented in the SOCTA 2021 is a stark reminder of the dynamic and the adaptable adversary we face in serious and organized crime in the EU. The analysis reflects on the fact that criminal structures are more fluid and flexible than previously thought, and that their operations are far-reaching and ambitious. Organized crime is simple and very complicated. Simple because little has changed in what organized crime is. The search for quick wealth and profit shapes crime schemes, drives cooperation and competition, and dictates risk-benefit considerations. It is very complicated because the structures, modus operandi, and criminal operators have undergone remarkable changes over the years, highlighting the versatility and flexibility of criminality. Organized crime undermines our economy, our society, and the institutions of state. For instance, the investment of billions of euros in illegal profits generated by organized crime in the EU in our licit economy distort competition and hinder economic development. I am concerned by the impact of serious and organized crime on the daily life of the European citizens, the growth of our economy, the strength and the resilience of our state institutions, and the potential of these phenomena to undermine the rule of law. I would like to share with you the key findings of the SOCTA that should all worry us. Firstly, we observe that the use of violence by criminals involved in serious and organized crime in the EU appears to have been increasing in terms of frequency and severity. A majority of criminal networks, around 60%, employ violence as part of their criminal business. Corruption is a feature of most, if not all, criminal activities in the EU. Corruption takes place at all levels of society and can range from petty burglary to complex multi-million euro corruption schemes. 60% of the criminal groups reported to Europol and for SOCTA engage in corruption. The scale and complexity of money laundering activities in the EU has previously been underestimated. Serious and organized crime in the EU fundamentally relies on the ability to launder vast amounts of criminal profits. For this purpose, professional money launderers have established a parallel underground financial system to process transactions and payments isolated from any oversight mechanism governing the financial system. Legal businesses, such as companies, are used to facilitate virtually all types of criminal activity with an impact on the EU. Indeed, more than 80% of the criminal networks active in the EU reported for the SOCTA 2021 use legal business structures for their criminal activities. And the use of technology is a key feature for serious and organized crime in 2021. Criminals, they exploit encrypted communications to network among each other. They use social media and instant messaging services to reach a larger audience, to advertise illegal goods, or to spread disinformation. In the SOCTA, it is clear that the trade in illegal drugs continues to dominate serious and organized crime in the EU in terms of the number of criminals and criminal networks involved and the vast amounts of criminal profits generated as part of the production, trafficking, and distribution of illegal drugs. Nearly 40% of the criminal groups reported are active in drugs trafficking. Much of the violence associated with serious and organized crime is related to the trade in drugs. The threat from cyber-dependent crimes has been increasing over the last year, not only in terms of number of attacks, but also in terms of sophistication of attacks. We also observe a continuous increase in activities related to online child sexual abuse over the recent years. The market for migrant smuggling services is still thriving, especially those related to the secondary movements within the European Union. Several steps in the criminal process of trafficking in human beings, such as recruitment of victims and advertisement of services, are almost entirely in the online domain. Organized property crime remains high. Fraud schemes targeting private citizens, small and medium enterprises, global corporations, and critical infrastructure are present in all the member states in the European Union, and online frauds in particular have been increasingly targeted the EU on a large scale. And then we have had the COVID, and we still have the COVID-19 pandemic, which has acted as a catalyst for the emergence of new online fraud schemes. The current crisis situation and the potential economic and social fallout threaten to create ideal conditions for the spread of organized crime in the EU. Criminals were already quick to adapt illegal products, modi operandi, and narratives to the COVID-19 pandemic. In this way, they exploited the fear and the anxieties of Europeans, and they profited from the scarcity of some vital goods during the pandemic. A potential deep economic recession following the COVID-19 pandemic may facilitate the growth of serious and organized crime in the European Union. Serious and organized crime deeply affects all layers of society. In addition to the direct impact on the daily lives of the European citizens, it also undermines the economy, the state institutions, and the rule of law. And we cannot fight this adversary alone. We need to understand the environment in which we operate, and we need to understand the challenges which we need to tackle today and tomorrow, and we need to do this together. The SOCTA 2021 provides such insights for Europol, for Member States' law enforcement authorities, and for our many partners around Europe and beyond. The threat from serious and organized crime and its impact on the EU only strengthens our commitment to further enhance the role of Europol as a key platform for law enforcement cooperation in Europe and beyond. But criminals should not underestimate the strengths and the conviction of the law enforcement community and of society. Together, we will achieve our goal for a safer Europe. Thank you.
Catherine de Bolle, Executive Director of Europol, thank you for your speech and for your introduction into the SOCTA, into the concerns you have regarding corruption and the use of violence and how it threatens the rule of law, our economy and society. We will go into those topics deeper when we have our roundtable discussion. For now, I would like to give the floor to the European Commissioner of Home Affairs. Thank you for being with us today. Ms. Ylva Johansson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This is a big day with the presentation of Europol EU SOCTA 2021 report, the flagship report on serious and organized crime. Let me also thank Francesca and Eduardo for welcoming us in Lisbon. It's always nice to be here. The EU SOCTA report is published every 4 years. It represents the peak of knowledge, analysis, and law enforcement experience. I should say that it's much more than a report. It's a guide for action, because we need to do more. The 2021 edition makes it clear. Organized crime is one of the biggest threats facing our society, rightly mentioned also by Catherine de Boll recently. It's a growing threat, a violent threat, contract killings, shootings, bombings, arsons, kidnappings, torture, and intimidation. Criminals kill innocent victims in the crossfire, murder journalists and lawyers in direct attacks on our democracies. Criminal networks increasingly use violence in Europe to reach their goals. And that goal is, in one word, money. In 1 year, criminals made almost 140 billion euros in criminal money in the European Union. 1% of the EU GDP, more than the GDP of some of our member states. Money that criminals use to pay for middlemen, strawmen, and hitmen. Money that we need for hospitals, vaccines, and recovery. Organized crime undermines our economy, society, and the rule of law. 60% of criminal networks engaged in corruption. 80% of networks control or infiltrate legitimate businesses. A parallel underground financial system enables an underground criminal marketplace. Organized crime is a flexible threat. Criminals adapt to the pandemic with great ease by scamming people and selling fake or non-existent cures. Criminals exploit technology, commit crimes online, and leave traces online. Trade criminal goods and services on the dark web, pay and launder profits with cryptocurrencies, hide their crimes with encryption. And organized crime is a cross-border threat. 70% of criminal networks are active in more than 3 member states. The publication of this report could not be more timely. In 2 days, on Wednesday, I will present my strategy on organized crime. This strategy deals with many of the issues raised in this report. At the heart of our new strategy is law enforcement cooperation. Criminals ignore national borders and European borders. We can only fight organized crime if we work closely together in Europe. And we will build on our successes. To start with, Europol. Europol is the cornerstone of EU law enforcement cooperation. Already in December, I launched proposals to boost the mandate of Europol so it can support law enforcement even better. Second, EMPACT, the European multidisciplinary platform against criminal threats. Within this framework, member states carry out 200 joint operational actions against organized crime every year. Very successful operations, leading to many arrests, boosting cooperation across the board. I want to move Europe from an ad hoc police cooperation to permanent police partnership. I will present this year an EU police cooperation code, streamlining all our existing tools into one coherent and modern rulebook. We must improve information sharing in day-to-day policing. Law enforcement can now already check with other member states if they have information on DNA, fingerprints, or number plates. We should simplify and speed up this information exchange. I will come forward with new proposals already this year, and I will consider possibilities to also run checks for facial images, driving licenses, police records, and ballistics. I will update rules to make better use of travel information, advanced passenger information people give at check-in when they travel, to help identify criminals at an early stage. Of course, making sure we always respect fundamental rights. We will scale up the fight against threats, new and old, threats that you have clearly outlined in the report today. We need to counter the rising tide of fake vaccines and sham medicines, and need to address counterfeiting, also being prioritized by the Portuguese presidency. Last year, Europol coordinated the very successful Operation Shield, leading to the capture of 73 million worth of fake or misused medicine, including 33 million medical devices. And we will fight environmental crimes, a growing crime in many member states. We will fight drug trafficking. The drug trade dominates organized crime and is a major source of income for criminals. Already last year, the member states adopted our new EU drugs strategy. Lisbon is an important center for drugs prevention and fighting drug trafficking. This afternoon, I will visit the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction, which provides policymakers with the information they need to tackle the harmful effects of drugs. And I will visit the Maritime Analysis and Operations Center Narcotics, in which 6 EU member states and the UK work together to fight drug smuggling in the high seas. Their work is more important than ever. Just last month, law enforcement captured the first ever so-called narco submarine, a 9-meter-long boat capable of transporting 2 tons of drugs. We will fight migrant smuggling. Smugglers abuse the dreams of desperate people of a better life. Increasingly, smuggling networks are putting people's lives at risk to maximize profit. Soon, I will present a new EU action plan to combat migrant smuggling. And we will fight child sexual abuse. This is actually my #1 priority. I presented a strategy last year, and I want Parliament and Council to agree on emergency short-term legislation so internet companies can continue to report child sexual abuse. But I'm also preparing a permanent legislation because we need good, clear, long-term rules to protect children. And we will fight the trafficking of human beings, one of the worst forms of organized crime. A crime especially against women. 72% of victims of trafficking in human beings are women, mostly forced to sell their bodies, forced into prostitution. This is also a crime against children. 1/4 of victims are children, most of them girls. It's a crime against EU citizens. Half of the victims of trafficking in human beings are EU citizens. It's a crime against people that treats people as a commodity, exploiting their bodies or their labor. On Wednesday, I will present a strategy against human trafficking to fight traffickers and protect victims. To fight all forms of organized crime, we must do several things. We must make sure that crime doesn't pay, and that criminal assets do not infiltrate our legal economy and society. Today, only 1% of criminal assets is confiscated. We will step up the fight against money laundering and improve asset recovery. We must follow the money to catch criminals in financial investigations. We must fight corruption. Especially now, we are mobilizing public money for healthcare and recovery. Not a euro, not a cent of this money must end up in the pockets of criminals. We need a high-tech law enforcement to fight tech-savvy criminals. 85% of evidence is digital. Criminals commit crimes online and leave traces online. We want to make it easier for law enforcement to access electronic evidence across borders. When service providers delete data, they potentially delete clues to countless crimes. We will look at possibilities for data retention so that evidence doesn't unintentionally disappear at the touch of a button. Obviously, these measures must be fully in line with fundamental rights. We must also deal with encryption. Criminals hide their crimes with encryption that's easy to use but impossible to break. And we must find solutions. When police have lawful access to information, they must also be able to get actual access to that information. Europol's new decryption facility will already help member states. We will support research and innovation in policing, for example, artificial intelligence, and support training in using technology, for example, to carry out digital investigations. I want to end by thanking Europol for this excellent report. It once again confirms Europol's essential role in supporting crime fighting in Europe. I would like to congratulate you, Catherine, and your team for this achievement. And I would like to thank all member states, EU agencies, international organizations, and all other partners for contributing to this report. A report that outlines the main criminal threats facing Europe today. It will guide everyday police and law enforcement cooperation. It will guide our long-term cooperation in the next impact cycle. And it will guide the Commission's policies and proposals. This is called the Europol's flagship report, and not for nothing. A flagship is not only the biggest and most important ship, it's also the leading ship that shows the direction of travel. And we can certainly plot our course by Europol's assessment of serious and organized crime. Thank you.
Thank you, European Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson. Thank you for your kind words towards our flagship report and your insights into your upcoming organized crime strategy. We are looking forward to its publication. Our fourth speaker now will be the Portuguese Minister for Home Affairs, Mr. Eduardo Cabrita. The floor is yours.
I warmly welcome my good friends Ylva and Catherine for coming for Lisbon for the presentation of this, as you said, not just one more report, the true flagship report on fight against crime. And allow me, before I switch to Portuguese, as I should do in Portugal, it is a personal honor to be here in this presentation with the Portuguese internal security forces, our police top representatives, with these three good friends, Ylva, Catherine, and my colleague Francisca. 6 years ago, when I returned to the government, I was appointed for a cocktail portfolio that included gender equality among my responsibilities. I'm very proud and very committed on these issues, and it's an honor to see on this stage that the things in Portugal and in Europe in this area are really changing. Allow me to say a few words in Portuguese.
This important report, the SOCTA report to 2021, analyzes in a unique manner our common commitment in these difficult times to make sure that Europe is a space of freedom, safety and justice. And I'm talking about challenging times when pandemic challenges our values, challenges how we can defend the greatest threat to our collective security and health, and how we can do it keeping effectiveness in fighting crime and our commitment to the defense of fundamental rights. Therefore, I'd like to restate the commitment of the security forces in home affairs that I am responsible for towards this European commitment and to working with Europol. The Portuguese presidency is more or less halfway through, but that does not mean we shouldn't recall the principles that are our priorities, among which they strengthen the European police partnership and the European cooperation in security are, as I said, among these priorities. SOCTA 2021 report produced by Europol that summarizes the challenges and shows the road traveled by Europol in the past years since 2018 under the leadership of Catherine de Boll, shows the main threats in terms of serious crime. And it is an instrument for the coming steps. It allows for police action not to be an instrument that follows facts or tries to mitigate the impact, but anticipates trends, puts intelligence to the service of security, deepens a trend of a police activity that is less and less an empirical act and more an activity aimed at a greater effectiveness. That is why Portugal is promoting the conclusions of the Council that grant permanent character to the political cycle, to this political cycle, and we support the strategy to fight terrorism presented by the Commission, as well as we are looking forward to the report to be presented next Wednesday by Madam Johansson. Impact is an essential instrument because it assumes priorities in fighting serious and organized crime at regional and pan-European level with an impact on the European Union. Therefore, I congratulate Europol for this report, and Impact 2022-2025 will also establish the common efforts of member states towards dismantling criminal groups that are a threat to European space of freedom, security and justice. So again, we are very honored to have you here. And it is under this scope that the Portuguese presidency decided to put at the top of our priorities, and as one of the subjects for the first council, informal council in January, the new mandate of Europol. We believe it will contribute a great deal to improve the responsiveness of this action in supporting law enforcement in the member states. Despite internal security being a responsibility and of the sovereignty of the states, crime does have a multi-criminal and transnational dimension, and therefore only a coordinated and coherent action will allow to fight it effectively. Europol is a basic platform for a concerted action focused on innovation, bringing pioneer methodologies to the service of the member states. The new crime threats that come from the digital world today, and therefore it is essential to gather efforts in a common aim, acting in areas that are very specialized, such as encrypting and analyzing metadata. Of course, this strengthening of the Europol capacity should always observe the fundamental values of the Union, namely as regards the treatment of personal data. The Europol's Innovation Center is therefore a priority, a key priority for the development of these potentialities in articulation with other agencies that act in the area of internal security, European internal security, such as Frontex, CEPOL, EU LISA, or the very special role of Eurojust. Innovation at the service of security through a holistic approach of threats with the contribution of all agencies and member states is a must, a requirement for the common citizen, and it requires a proactive policy in fighting crime from all stakeholders. The evolution of fighting violence in the European context, the importance of prosecution against corruption, money laundering, the dimension and relevance of the relation with our neighbors to the east and to the south are key elements in this global capacity, such as what we have been adopting in Portugal with adopting mechanisms as a passenger name record that we have developed, the mechanisms as of unified contact, gathering all law enforcement agencies in a single point in their relation to the European institutions. So the fighting against criminal networks, namely when they use corruption of violence, requires an articulated international and national response, and increasingly a more technological one. And therefore, that is why the Portuguese presidency of the EU considers so relevant the cooperation with North Africa. They are our natural neighbors, so we should have with them very broad dialogue also on safety, therefore complementing this arch of security. This initiative has two elements. We don't want to create redundant instruments, given that there are already other initiatives ongoing, and should it circumscribed to justice and home affairs, but approaching in a broad manner phenomena such as migrations, mobility, border management, serious and organized crime, cybersecurity, cybercrime, judicial and political cooperation. All these phenomena, all these dimensions should not be seen in isolation. To divide them will lead to failure. Only an integrated vision will allow for an effective response at national and European level. That is why I will conclude by greeting this dimension, which is in tune with the priorities of the Portuguese presidency, and greeting Madam Commissioner Ilva and Europol for the results presented here today, and mainly showing you on behalf of the Portuguese presidency how much we trust the future of police cooperation in Europe, stating European values of Europe as a space of liberty, freedom, and justice and security.
Thank you very much, Eduardo Cabrita, Minister of Home Affairs of Portugal. Thank you for your insights into the thinking of the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the EU, and thank you also for stressing the need for increased cooperation. We are halfway through, and we will now move to what we call a roundtable discussion. So we will speak a little bit more in detail on the topics we have raised. And we will loose this a little bit up with a short series of video clips where we will dive more deeply into the topics of drugs, THB, cybercrime, and financial and economical crime. We will start now with the first short video clip, and then we can discuss. Please watch with us our first clip presented by the head of unit of the team behind the SOCTA, Tamara Scotten.
Majority of the criminal networks in the EU, over 80%, are involved in the trade in drugs, organized property crime, frauds, trafficking in human beings, and migrant smuggling.
At least here we
Nearly half of these 80% are involved in the drugs trade. The use of violence by criminals has been increasing, both in terms of frequency and severity. A majority of criminal networks, around 60%, employ violence as a part of their criminal business. Corruption is also a common feature of organized crime in the EU. Almost 60% of the criminal networks engage in corruption. Corruption takes place at all levels of society and can range from petty bribery to complex multi-million euro schemes. Money laundering is another essential component of the vast majority of criminal operations. Serious and organized crime in the EU fundamentally relies on the ability to launder vast amounts of criminal profits. Also here, the scale and the complexity of money laundering activities in the EU has previously been underestimated. 2/3, 68% of criminal networks use basic
main points. So Tamara was introducing the main key messages of the SOCTA. Of course, it's a document that looks into all crime areas, but as a good analysis, it points out which areas are most threatening. And if you only want to go home with 3 figures, please remember the 80, 60, 40 figures. So 80% of the criminal networks are using legal business structures for hiding their crime. 60% of organized crime is using corruption, and 40% are in the international drug markets. And this is so threatening because it shows clearly that the lines are blurring. So it's not the legal world and the criminal world with a clear distinction between, and you can easily fight your enemy. It showed that with 60% corruption and 80% of criminal networks using legal business structures, that the line is blurred. And this is why we think, or this is why our executive director at Europol called it the breaking point for the European Union, because we need to act. And that would be my first question for you, if you could say a little bit more on this term breaking point. Why is it so important now?
We believe in Europol that indeed we are at a breaking point when we look at the serious and organized crime situation in the EU, because the threat has never been so high. We see that the use of violence in drug-related crime, for instance, the exploitation of women and children is still at a very high level. Daily, we see on a daily basis, we see an increase of victims related to cybercrime. And this all generates money for the criminals, for the serious and organized crime groups, and they want to do something with the money. They want to invest in the legal economy, and they want to strengthen their own business imperium. And this in a period of potential economic recession and social recession. So we are very concerned because we see that the serious and organized crime groups, they will, for instance, buy restaurants that are almost broke. And they have time to wait. They have money and they have time. So what we learned from the past economic recession is that serious and organized crime is becoming stronger when they are confronted with a financial crisis. And that is our big concern. And that is why we have to do more. And we have to recognize this as a priority on European level. We work already together as a law enforcement community, but a multidisciplinary approach is needed and joint action is needed. We really believe that we have to do more, much more than we do today.
Thank you, Katrine Bolle. Our executive director was looking at you, Commissioner Johansson, if I may ask. You already have lots on your plate. You mentioned the organized crime strategy, the drug strategy, the THB strategy. I mean, there's so much to be concerned about. Where do you start?
Well, of course, we need to do a lot of things, but to answer your question, I think what concerns me most is this, how it's blurred and interlinked into the legal economy. and you can't really see the differences. And that's also very much linked to corruption. And this is a huge threat for democracy and trust in society. And that's also for the rule of law. And that's what the main basic for our European Union and for our societies. So I think that's what I'm thinking of is, of course, now we are presenting, I'm presenting on Wednesday a lot of new proposals on police cooperation and other things. But I think it's also a part of society, the resilience in society, where we also need ordinary citizens to be active, you know, to be a bit resilient. Don't pay that cheap hairdresser, or don't do that, you know, because it's going to feed into the criminal economy. So I think this is also a challenge that we should discuss how we can address this, not only for law enforcement, but for the whole society to be more resilient towards this poison into our society and legal economy.
Absolutely. Thank you for conclusion. And you mentioned the figure a little bit more than only 1% of criminal financial assets are confiscated. And you've been at our headquarters when we launched the Economic Financial Crime Center, the EFEC, last year. So there's work to do. Thank you very much. Our next video, if we maybe try again, would be on drugs. Maybe we can try. If not, I can also summarize. But otherwise, let's have a look into our colleague Sascha Strupp's video on drugs and the SOCTA. No. I think we have the same problem again. Well, importantly, as said, 40% of the criminal networks are into the organized international drug trade. And much of the violence that is increasing comes from those organized crime groups that are in the drug trade. And Sascha is highlighting, of course, the role of corruption, because you can't bring in tons of cocaine, of cannabis, of heroin into the European Union market without corruption. Yeah, that's what he just said, if you could listen to him. That's really surprising, but European Union is now the main market for cocaine. So around 60% of the cocaine is going to the European market. And the money, the profit they use for infiltrating our legal economy, and this will break our economy. And a society with a broken economy is dysfunctional. North Africa, we've mentioned it. Minister Van Dunem and Mr. Cabrita mentioned the cooperation, the objective of the Portuguese presidency to have a better dialogue with the North African countries. We can speak on that, because large quantities of cannabis are coming in from especially North Africa.
On the globe, such as Australia, Japan, and many more places. Criminal networks in the EU have even further increased their capacities for the production and distribution of synthetic drugs. The market for heroin has largely remained stable over the last years. However, heroin continues to have a detrimental impact on the health and security of European citizens. We are closely monitoring the emergence of synthetic opioids, such as fentanyl and its analogues, which have the potential to replace heroin due to their greater potency and cheaper prices. Illegal drugs cause serious and direct harm to consumers' health. Drug markets sustain a vast underground economy, which causes economic dependency, undermines local communities, and strengthens criminal networks. The production of drugs also has a significant negative impact on the environment in the EU and elsewhere. The fight against illegal drugs is a key security challenge for the EU and its member states over the coming years.
Think of a small package of fentanyl, that's big profit. So, Mr. Cabrita, you mentioned the dialogue, especially with North African countries, that this is a priority for the Portuguese presidency. How do you see the role of or how can the dialogue be increased to try to fight the incoming drugs trade also from North Africa?
Well, when we refer as a priority of the Portuguese presidency a special relation with Africa, and especially mostly with North Africa on the area also of justice and home affairs, this was decided by the Portuguese presidency. It's a common approach which was presented by our Foreign Affairs Minister, and also in the last JAI meetings by my colleague Francisca and myself. What we intend, we look, it's our tradition, we look for Africa as our main and closer partner. And we look to our common basis and our historical and traditional relation with Mediterranean country. Mediterranean is not just history, say it was the Mare Nostrum. Mediterranean is our most closer relationship, and we should have an active dialogue with these countries. For Portugal, of course, Maghreb countries are quite important. Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, we have special relationships with that. But and also is important Western Africa. We should go beyond and also work together with countries like Mauritania or Senegal. But we should have a global approach and as a win-win relation. That means we, and Ilva knows that better than nobody here, we cannot just discuss readmissions of illegal migrants. We should discuss on a broad approach how to cooperate that on development on the origin countries, how to tackle the illegal activities in origin, in transit countries, and work on the broad aspects looking for issues like what were referred here on drugs, but also on the different dimensions, trafficking human beings, migration, saying, as we said, legal migration is the opposite and best way to prevent trafficking of human beings. And we should have a direct approach and have agreements, broad wave agreements with these countries, as we were developing in the last years with the Western Balkans countries. We intend to do that. That's why we have a meeting next May concerned with the relation with Mediterranean countries, and also in the area of police cooperation, we should adopt this kind of focus.
Absolutely. Yeah. You need a national strategy, a European strategy, a global strategy. Minister van Doenen, your views on that issue?
Yes, thank you. I think that it's also important to think this cooperation with the judiciary, not only with police cooperation, but also judiciary cooperation, because you have lots of situations where you must practice acts that depends on the judiciary authorities. So you must involve also the judicial authorities and put together a policial and judiciary cooperation. And I'd like to say that this approach to our southern neighbors is also important in what concern to something like a common approach on the rule of law and human rights. You need to work together on those issues too. It's important. I know that Morocco, some years ago, Morocco began doing an important event. I think this each 2 years to discuss these questions. How can we deal with the rule of law? How can we deal with human rights not only in Northern Africa but in all Africa? And they began these meetings. And they began these discussions, and I think you should now, with this partnership, go on this and to go further to strengthen this idea of the importance of rule of law, importance of not only judiciary but also policial cooperation. and fundamental rights. The fundamental rights is a key issue here.
Absolutely, yeah. And you mentioned in your speech there's no judicial success without security, and no security without judicial successes.
Yes. That's my point. That's my
absolutely.
point. There's no security without justice, and no justice without security. There are two.
And that's why The Hague, the City of Peace of Justice, has both European agencies in one city, Eurojust and Europol, just across the road.
Yes. That's why I think that Europol and Eurojust must work together. I think you have our results will be best if you can put these two agencies working together in perfect harmony. So one of them has the data and work with the data and the information and the threats, and the other can work in the operational point of view, not only by driving the investigations that are put in place by the police officers in the several countries of the European Union, but also in cooperating with the judicial authorities in several member states.
Right. Good. So I think we should continue, because maybe I get a positive thumbs up. That's the best sign and understood in every culture. So let's continue with the third video. Our colleague Robert Srepinko from Slovenia. He's head of the European Migrant Smuggling Center at Europol, and he speaks on THB, trafficking human being. That's the next clip.
Criminal networks do not hesitate to profit from the despair of irregular migrants or prey on the hopes and dreams of victims of trafficking of human beings. Migrant smuggling has been a priority for the EU and member state law enforcement authorities over the last years. Organized migrant smuggling remains a key activity for criminals and is sustained by continued demand for facilitation services. A range of push and pull factors for migration to the EU may result in a surge of demand for migrant smuggling services, as we have witnessed in 2015 and 2016. Digital technologies and the widespread use of social media and encrypted communications allow migrant smugglers to advertise their services, to coordinate among each other, and to recruit victims. Facilitation services for secondary movements within the EU are high in demand, but often remain undetected due to the use of dangerous modi operandi that can cost migrants' lives. Secondary movements are a key problem to the EU. Migrant smugglers treat irregular migrants as commodities, often prioritizing the aim of maximizing profits over the migrants' health. The trafficking of human beings, short THB, is a core activity of serious and organized crime in the EU and remains a crime threat to the EU for the foreseeable future. Several steps in the process of trafficking human beings now take place online. This includes the recruitment of victims and advertising their exploitation. Traffickers abuse victims of sexual exploitation, both adult and underage, male and female, in clandestine settings and in public environments such as hotels, bars, restaurants, clubs, massage parlors, and brothels. The intra-EU trafficking of victims remains a significant concern in the area of THB for sexual exploitation. Nonetheless, the origins of the victims of the THB exploited for sexual exploitation in the EU are highly diverse, with victims of 55 different nationalities from 5 different continents being exploited in the EU. The trafficking in human beings for labor exploitation remains underreported. Labor exploitation occurs in various sectors of the economy, including transportation, construction, agriculture, hospitality, retail, and cleaning services, among others. Child trafficking is a heinous crime, targeting a particularly vulnerable section of society. The trafficking and exploitation of underage victims occurs across the EU and targets both EU and non-EU victims. Both migrant smuggling and THB are significant crime threats. At Europol, the European Migrant Smuggling Center is working with member states and our many partners to fight this phenomenon.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to our guys in the technique to make this work. This makes my job a bit easier. Yeah, there was a crisis before the COVID crisis, the migrant smuggling crisis, and it still exists. And we also have a THB, trafficking human being crisis. Commissioner Johansson, you mentioned in your speech that it's one of the crimes that are, strange to say, but closest to your heart to fight, THB. What's your view on those figures? 55 nationalities from 5 countries, from 5 continents.
Well, it's clear that we need to do more, and we have now the anti-trafficking directive that's 10 years old, and we are going to look into now whether we go for infringement to member states that have not implemented properly. But I will also look into if we need to strengthen the directive. And I can point one specific example is that in the current directive, it's mandatory for member states to criminalize if a person employs a victim of trafficking. But if you use the service of a victim of trafficking, it's not mandatory to criminalize it. And this is the most common. You don't employ a young girl for sexual exploitation, you use her body. And this is, I think also we need also to go after the money and to criminalize those that actually use the victims of trafficking. So that's one example what we can do. But we also need to do more when it comes to trafficking from third country towards the European Union. That's also how we protect our borders. And that we have to register everybody and make sure, especially when it comes to children, that they are not being missing. We have a lot of missing children in the European Union, and that's why we need to fingerprint for younger. That's why we need to have a special safeguards for young people, especially unaccompanied minors that come to the European Union. And we can see that a lot of them just disappears and probably ends up as victims for trafficking. So, and we also need to educate border guards so that they can know about the signs if there is a risk of this might be a victim of trafficking. So I think there's a lot of things, more things that we can do in each member state, but also as a European Union.
Absolutely. The internal trafficking was mentioned. Is that also a concern? On the one hand, you have Schengen. On the other hand, how to stop internal movements?
Yes, I think that's most for the police cooperation, actually. We can do a lot more there. And that's why I would like to see that police cooperation by default. That's why we're going to present this European Police Cooperation Code. And also that's why I'm now planning to modernize the PRIM decision so that it's for exchanging of information, fingerprints or DNA, and I will also look into whether we should have face recognition into that. That's also part of a way to strengthen the police cooperation, and I think we have a lot of shortcomings, actually. We have possibilities, but sometimes it's too complicated and too many different connections. So we don't, police men and women don't use it as frequent as they should do. And that's what we can help with a better, for example, to create a special hub so where you can immediately connect to all other registers in all other police forces. Police register, for example. So I think there's a lot of these things we can do to facilitate the police cooperation. I think that's the most important. And just want to mention one more thing is that now we are going into the recovery after the pandemic, and we have targeted a specific percentage to digitalization. And I do hope member states will use this to digitalize their law enforcement, because there's a huge need of modernizing and using more digitalize the law enforcement in several member states. And now is actually the opportunity to use this extra money to do that.
Right, thank you very much. We have to speed up a little bit, so let's move to the next clip. It's the head of the so-called EFEC, European Financial Economic Crime Center, launched last year together with the Commissioner and Executive Director De Bolle at Europol's headquarters in The Hague. Please listen to Burkhard Mühl.
Money laundering and fraud, economic and financial crimes have a significant impact on the EU. They deprive EU governments of funding, result in significant financial losses for businesses around Europe, and can have a devastating impact when they target private citizens. Money laundering is an essential component of the vast majority of criminal operations. Money laundering allows criminal structures to expand by enabling criminal networks to legitimize or conceal the assets from law enforcement, make profits and reinvest illicit funds. Money laundering can range from self-laundering schemes to sophisticated, large-scale laundering services which require specialist organizations. Professional money laundering networks continue to pose a major threat. Criminal networks are increasingly outsourcing their money laundering activities. Member states report the existence of specialized criminal networks and individual experts offering money laundering as a service in exchange for a fee or a commission. These networks typically maintain business structures, including shell companies in offshore jurisdictions, and exploit legal entities registered in European countries on a large scale. The exact scale of illicit finance generated through money laundering is still unknown due to serious intelligence gaps on criminal turnover and profits. Fraud schemes are constantly evolving. We clearly see that fraud schemes take advantage of the digital era. Fraud schemes are targeting private citizens, small and medium enterprises, global corporations and critical infrastructure present in all member states. Online frauds in particular have been increasingly targeting the EU on a large scale. New fraud typologies often involve new online tools and digital techniques. Online fraud schemes are used to obtain personal information such as bank account information and banking login details from victims. Criminals increasingly use online platforms for social engineering. Online fraud includes a variety of cyber scams and is also related to card-not-present fraud. At Europol, the newly created European Financial and Economic Crime Center, or EFEC, is working together with member states and our many partners in the private industry to fight this serious threat.
The Economic Financial Crime Center, the EFEC, that was on your agenda, Executive Director De Bolle. It was under your leadership that the EFEC was launched last year. And if we see now the figures in the SOCTA about the shadow economy, I mean, you had the right direction when you launched it.
Yes. Not me alone. I was inspired by the police chiefs in all the European member states. We were all very concerned about money laundering, the illegal economy, and the setup of an underground financial system. And the big aim for us is to gain expertise and to really attract the experts to fight this crime. And we really decided together to go after the money. And as I mentioned before, organized crime, it's very simple but also very complicated. But the simple thing is that they do it for their profits and they want to make money out of it. So that is why we did set up the Economic and Financial Crime Center with experts from all the member states. We have a network and a liaison officers network related to financial crime. In fact, when we have an investigation targeting an organized crime network of group, we always launch we try to launch a financial investigation to that, because we see that the illicit profits are really high and we have to go after it. To develop expertise, because a key development in the European Union is cryptocurrencies. We also need to gain more expertise in that so that we find new ways and new partners to work together to tackle this and to find answers from a law enforcement perspective.
Absolutely. Mr. Cabrita, the Portuguese presidency, cryptocurrencies, shadow economy, money laundering, is this something also that concerns Portugal at the moment under the presidency?
Certainly, that's why we put very high in our presidency priorities to the new mandate for Europol. It was presented in the last days of the German presidency, but we didn't see, we just are going to discuss. No, we gave priority to the technical work, which is and are going on a very positive approach. And we put that in our first informal meeting last January, and we see this kind of economic criminality as a transnational dimension that should be tackled by also not always, of course, on first stage by national policies, but should be approached on a global way. That's why we are not sure. We never say that we are going to conclude this discussion, but I think we are going to put it in a very advanced way that maybe on the Slovenian presidency we may finish this debate. We are working very closely with Commissioner Ylva Johansson, supporting at political but also at technical level to give this, make this go ahead.
Right, thank you. Then we will move to our last clip. It's our head of the EC3, the European Cybercrime Center at Europol, Edvardas Sileris, speaking on cybercrime and the SOCTA.
The EU is on the path to total digitalization, a development that will continue at a fast pace with significant impact on society, public administration, governance, and the economy as a whole. Technological progress is a great motor for innovation and prosperity. However, these developments also create new opportunities for high-tech criminals. The threat from cybercrime has been increasing over recent years, not only in terms of number of attacks, but also in terms of impact and of the sophistication of attacks. Most common types of cyber attacks involve ransomware, malware, and distributed denial-of-service attacks. Cyber attacks are likely still significantly underreported. Cyber-dependent crimes cause a significant financial loss to business, private citizens, and public sector. Attacks to critical infrastructure have a significant impact and can potentially entail severe consequences, including loss of life. The availability of cybercrime services online as part of crime-as-a-service business model makes cybercrime more accessible by lowering the technological expertise required to carry out these crimes. The threat from cyber attacks is set to further increase in volume and sophistication over the coming years. Cybercrime is highly dynamic, exploiting quickly advancing technologies. Critical infrastructure will continue to be targeted by cybercriminals, which poses significant risk. Developments such as the expansion of Internet of Things and the increased use of artificial intelligence will have a significant impact. As technology evolves, law enforcement will have to prepare to encounter new and dynamic threats. At Europol, we are working with member states and our many partners to prepare for these upcoming challenges and changes.
Cybercrime and the SOCTA, Edvardas Sileris, head of the EC3. Journalists often ask, what's new in cybercrime? Well, the old threats are still there. We've seen it, ransomware, malware, DDoS attacks. Crime as a service, you don't need to be a hacker anymore to hack somebody. You can just get the service somewhere and pay for it. Because it's our last clip, I would like to give the floor to each of our four speakers. Minister van Doenen, because you also represent the judicial part, and we are speaking about the cyber world. I know that also the hate speech topic is on your agenda. What's your view on that?
Yes, the cybercrime and the cyber criminality is now a big issue when you are coming to the digital transition in our lives. I think they began before us. So they came to digital, to the underground, the digital, and they organized themselves. And they put their money, the money they get, far of our view. So, what we think, what we are working in our presidency is essentially on getting instruments so that you can get the digital evidence easier. for instance, you need to get digital evidence that is in another country, that you can have, that the other country can recognize your order, the order given by judicial authority of your member states, and can get it and can preserve it. Even about data retention, you are working on data retention. And on the 29 January's meeting on justice ministers, we agree that you must have a common framework on that data retention. And you are working on this. I think we believe you shall arrive to a good solution soon. But speaking about hate speech, I think you have their problem too, because now you have these big roots where everybody can speak, and this is important that freedom of speech can be present. It's a part of the rule of law and the fundamental freedoms. You must support the fundamental freedoms. But in the other side, you have these crimes, these hate crimes, in internet permanently. So what you need to do here is to try to establish an equilibrium between the needs of the freedom of liberty, the freedom of speech, on the one side, and the other side to tackle the criminality that is going on and is putting in, is frightening, is stressing our societies, our democracies, and the rule of law. So this is a complex exercise, but you must work on and you must complete them.
Yeah, thank you for that. Equilibrium is needed. It's of course a judicial question, a law enforcement question, it's a question for society. You mentioned data retention and digitalization. Commissioner Johansson, you also mentioned already digitalization, cybercrime. What's your conclusion today on this topic?
Well, I think the conclusions, I already said that I think that the EU SOCTA 2021 is not just an excellent report, it's a plan for action. And this is the most important, that we need to act because the threats are growing. And that's why we need to step up on our side as well. But let me also, for this closing round, say something about children. I think that we all, as parents, as adults, we feel the obligation to protect our children and other children, but also, I must say, as legislators, we are also obliged, in my view, to protect children. And this is really the thing that we need to do now. The current situation is that we do not have the legislative ground for voluntary reporting from the internet service providers of child sexual exploitation. We are lacking today 650 reports each day. They're not being reported. Just because we are still not having found the right compromise between the Parliament and Council. And this is really, I mean, children are suffering every day from this. If we don't have the reports, we can't go after to save the victims and also to prosecute the offender. I mean, this is really crucial. And we see now in the middle of the pandemic that this crime is really increasing in many different aspects. And the grooming of children, spending so much time in front of the computer, we can see increase of so-called self-produced materials where children are forced to do things with themselves or with their siblings, posting it on internet. And I must say, this is a terrible crime, and we really need to do more. I can't really, we can't defend that we are not doing everything that we can to protect these children.
Thank you for your clear words. Executive Director De Bolle, protecting children is also top on your agenda, and we have published at Europol a couple of reports of how child sexual abusive material and increased online in the pandemic. So that's something very important we have to tackle.
Indeed, we saw during the pandemic that perpetrators were actively looking how to distribute more child sexual abuse material online. And I hope that, as the Commissioner mentioned, that a legal solution will be found very soon, because it's about the most vulnerable in society, and we see that an increasing level of online child sexual abuse, it is distributed highly. And then related to cybercrime as a whole, data is the new gold. So that is where cyber criminals are after. Most of the data is stored in the private sector. So what we expect from a law enforcement perspective is an ethical debate on the use of data on a policy level, on a law enforcement level, justice level. We have to accept that digitalization is there, and we have to be ready to tackle crime in the future. So we need this ethical debate very urgently.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Mr. Cabrita, your closing words of the SOCTA launch today, also on behalf of the European Presidency, also maybe your thoughts on cybercrime.
Well, let me explain, first of all, that we should look for this report as not just a stage of the art, but as a platform for future work. And we should not rely on discussing principles. On principles we all agree. As we said, as the theme for Portuguese presidency is also, as we say, time for deliver. It's time to deliver, and that's why also in this area, as the crime, our societies are in a digital transition time, also crime is on digital transition. That's why it's so important that we may conclude our work on in the regulation on the terrorist contents online. We just closing very near to close this discussion, and we hope we may finish this in this semester, in the time of the Portuguese presidency. That's an example. As Ilva said on child abuse, we should go ahead on that. On the 3 years ago, and first 3.5 years ago, and with the first time I was with Luís Neves on the discussion on the terrorist contents online, was just a very theoretical exchange of views with the digital platforms. How far we did, and how we advanced these years. Now we moved from a discussion with the digital platforms to regulations that were made, were discussed, were adopted now and discussed with the Commission, with Member States, with the European Parliament, and we are very close to adopt that. And this is really the example of a concrete achievement to have more than 90% of terrorist contents erased, removed in less than 1 hour. This is a major achievement. We should use this example in other areas like child abuse or in economic crime. That is the practical approach we should give to this SOCTA report.
Thank you very much. We are a little bit in overtime, to use the terminology from sports, but if there are questions from journalists in the room, of course we respect social distancing, but we have some journalists in the room. I see 2 hands on the left side. If you please would give your name and the media you're representing, and you can, the person you would like to address.
Mariana Flor, da RTP. Uma pergunta para a
One question. This is a question from RTP, a question to the Europol director. Is Portugal one of the countries where corruption is a more serious issue in Europe? And a question to the Minister of Justice, take into account that in this report focus a lot on corruption. My question is, after the decision last Friday when a judge decided not to prosecute certain defendants for corruption because the crime prescribed, how would you qualify this in Europe? That's the question to the Minister.
As the question is related to a domestic issue, I would prefer that the Minister of Justice and the Chief of Police, that they can give an answer to this question.
You want to go ahead?
Muito obrigada.
The question about knowing the role of Portugal in Europe, we don't have indicators to measure corruption, only perception indexes and organized by International Transparency. And lately, Portugal, as far as I remember, was ranked 33rd. So there has been some backs and forths. Now, what I'd like to remind you, and this is public, that Portugal last year started to work on an anti-corruption strategy, national strategy. There was a first public discussion last year. It was approved in general by the government and it was put to public discussion. It was subject to a very broad debate, and then it was approved on the past 18th of March, this strategy anti-corruption. So the position of Portugal regarding corruption, of course, it will not be affected by these specific decisions, and I am not going to comment these decisions made on Friday. I just like to say that the judicial system in Portugal is independent. The Minister of Justice does not have to intervene in issues related to the concrete functioning of the system, and we also have our specific dialectic. The idea that Portugal can, decide, depending on the concrete decisions, regardless of the political and economic relevance of the people involved in this lawsuit, that may change the external image of Portugal. Well, we should make sure that does not happen, that we are working every day, all institutions that fight corruption, judiciary, police to begin with, the public prosecution, the courts, that in the last years we have been working towards identifying issues and ending all barriers. And these elements that you mentioned were already identified in the anti-corruption strategy, and we have also identified solutions for these problems. So the most important is for us to work actively, effectively in fighting corruption. That is the purpose, that is the objective of the government. We have worked on that, and also in terms of empowering and capacity building the judicial police and the public prosecution. So we have evolved significantly in terms of fighting corruption. For many years it was just something that we talked about. Now this recent lawsuit that you're talking about is the evidence that we took in we progressed in fighting this type of phenomena and in clarifying them by the public prosecution. Now, judicial procedures will have to be worked on courts, decided by courts. They have their own working dynamic here and as in the rest of the world. Thank you.
Yes, Inês Pereira, sou jornalista da TV, mas também...
But I am also hosting for SIC Television. A question to the Commissioner. In your last visit to Portugal, did you consider the death of an Ukrainian citizen in the Lisbon airport as a violation of human rights? Last week, the Portuguese government approved the reform of the border service that will now include a new body will be created. As an European Commissioner for Home Affairs, have you followed these latest efforts of the Portuguese government? What is your opinion? Also, there have been some reports on how foreigners are being received by these services, namely the illegal detention of children at the airport. My question is, has Portugal been observing the parameters of the European Union? A question to the Minister of Home Affairs. The trade union of this border guard service wants that the Parliament should issue an opinion on this reform. Do you think that should take place? And insisting on the question that my colleague asked a while ago to the Europol director. What is the perception about corruption, crime, as Portugal acted more than other member states in this cooperation or request for cooperation in order to fight financial and economic crime?
First, let me say something also on corruption. Every year, there's a new instrument that the Commission will publish, a rule of law report, and we published the first one last fall. And there we also have a section on corruption for every member state. So that is where we also assess the corruption situation in all member states. According to this situation and this death at the airport and what's being done after that, I think that's also better for Eduardo Cabrita to answer to that question.
Portugal é considerado dos países da Europa que
Portugal is considered one of the countries in Europe that welcomes better migrants and refugees. Portugal is a partner to all actions. And the Commission has said this in several reports, in all European programs. Unaccompanied minors in Greece, rescues in the Mediterranean. Our security forces are in the Greek islands, the gendarmerie, the maritime police, the border guards. Every day they save thousands of, or throughout years they have saved thousands of lives. That's the image of Portugal. Now, regarding this very specific case that I already commented at the time, just like Madam Commissioner talked about it at the time, the state did what it had to do. The state intervened immediately, and we already paid the largest civil compensation ever decided by the prosecutor's office, and as soon as ever to the wife of this gentleman. So when justice is swift, that's only fair, and it shows how the decisions are correct. And our independence, as far as the decisions are concerned, and I should not comment.
SOCTA, I would like to ask you only question on the topic of the SOCTA today. If you have a domestic question, you will have plenty of opportunity in the future. If it's on SOCTA related, please go ahead.
My name is Catarina Demoni. I'm a correspondent for Reuters News Agency. Commissioner, you spoke a lot about organized crime, about external groups committing crime within the European Union. My question is, when criminality infiltrates our police forces, our security forces, our border control, my colleagues here in Portugal just mentioned the case of an Ukrainian man that died in the airport here in Lisbon at the hands of the border control. So my question is, what is the European Union doing to tackle the crime within people who are part of the system, which is something that we've been seeing? And then the other question about migration. The Internal Affairs Minister referred about the migrants coming from Greece. Portugal has only received 72 of the 500 migrants it pledged to receive. So my question is, when are they arriving? Is this because of the pandemic that is taking a bit too long? Are they still coming this year? When can we expect them to arrive in Portugal? Thank you.
Don't know if you would like to reply to the question. Otherwise, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first let me say that the EU competence is cross-border and serious crimes. Otherwise, it's national competences, but it's not that easy, because I think it's of the essence to have proper reporting systems to find out if there are people that are doing service in the police, or could also be in the border guards, to find out when there are alleged misconduct, that it will be investigated properly, and that will be a response to that. And that is, of course, the responsibility for each member state, and I'm responsible to make sure that we have that also in our EU agencies. But having said that, we have also now recently, as I mentioned, proposed a boosted mandate for Europol. And there we also put in the possibility for Europol to actually propose starting on an investigation, even if it's not a cross-border crime, but if it's a crime that has really serious affected towards our core values on the European Union. So this is a new possibility that I have proposed in the new mandate, and that could be, for example, when there is a crime that is that could have close, if there are links to a national police force and maybe going after a journalist or things like that. These kind of crimes, I'm not proposing a new possibility for Europol to not start an investigation, because they can't do that, but to propose, even if it's a crime that is only committed in one member state.
By border control officers would be one of those crimes?
Well, it's of course for Europol to assess that, but I'm opening up a little bit more for these kind of crimes that could affect the Union significantly, even if it's not a cross-border crime.
Okay, thank you for that, Commissioner Johansson. Yeah, an important distinction between start and propose a crime. We would then come to an end.
My question about migrants, which I asked the Minister of Internal Affairs about the migrants coming from Greece. We pledged to receive 500. We only received 72.
I don't think it's a question for the day today. You will have plenty of opportunity to ask questions on very specific topics in the future to the ministers from Portugal. You need to understand that we have an international global audience of people who maybe stopped working just to listen in for the SOCTA presentation. And although Portugal is a great country and we're happy to be here, there might be people on the planet who don't have an interest in this topic now. I would like to close now today, because we come to an end. It's almost 2 hours. I would like to thank Minister Franziska von Dunem for her appearance today, Minister Eduardo Cabrita and Commissioner Ylva Johansson, and especially Executive Director Katrien de Bolle for presenting the SOCTA today here. I also would like to say muito obrigado to Luís Neves, National Director of the Polícia Judiciária, Carlos Farinha, and also Jorge Simão for having us here. It was a lovely day in Lisbon. Thank you very much.